Setting up for Facebook Live. It's not letting me do it. So we're just going to be on Facebook Live tonight.
One at a time. Well, I know you'll upload it later.
We'll be uploading it later. Everyone's getting an alert. Those who follow us are getting an alert saying Road Women is live now. So we'll give everybody a second to hop on.
Okay.
I'm sure they're excited to see you. There they are. We'll give everyone a little bit of time.
Sure.
Okay, well, as people start rolling in, I will start welcoming everybody. It's slow going. Once they get that little alert, they're like, oh yeah, we're supposed to be here right now. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kat Clemens. I am the current president of Road Women located here in Harris County. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We had a little technical difficulty, so we'll just be on Facebook Live and not also on YouTube. So my apologies for that. This is an important forum. We are with the candidates tonight for the Democratic candidates for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. This is very, very important. Currently, every seat is held by a Republican, so this could not be a more important forum, and I'd love for you to get to know our candidates. Tuesday night, we had an awesome event with the candidates for the Texas Supreme Court. So thank you to everybody who participated in that and joined us and shared and had watch parties, all of that. That was so important. It was inspiring and moving, and I was fired up and ready to go. And I know that I'm not the only one who had that feeling. So thank you to everybody who joined us for that. But tonight, will also be just as amazing. We have 3 amazing candidates for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. So thank you again for joining us. We also, I would be remiss if I did not thank the clubs and organizations and individuals who sponsored these 2 events with us and helped me put it together, helped all of us put it together. So in alphabetical order, I'm gonna name off our other co-hosts of this event tonight and for Tuesday as well. The Bay Area Democratic Movement, Brazoria County Democratic Party, I've already lost my spot, Diane Troutman, Houston Black American Democrats, Houston GLBT Political Caucus, John Cotter, Pantsuit Republic Houston, the Democratic Club of the Woodlands, the Spring Democratic Club, Texas Democratic Women of Galveston County, and Texas Democratic Women of Harris County. Thank you all so much for helping us do these 2 important events. They've been fantastic to work with, so I appreciate all of your help in doing all of this. And I'd also like to thank my board members and my advisory board members of Road Women who are in the background tonight fielding your questions. So if you have a question tonight, make sure to use the hashtag question before the question so that they can find your questions in the comments. Make sure to send these candidates love in the chat. We'll make sure that they go back and read them. And if they don't answer your question here tonight, they will go back when they have time. They are busy people, but they will go back and answer those questions when they can. If you're interested in becoming a part of Road Women and helping us continue to put on these kinds of amazing events, we would love to have your support. You can head over to roadwomen.com and click on the Get Involved tab, and your support would help us turn Texas blue in November. So we would appreciate your support. Now to introduce our moderator for the evening. And for those of you who weren't here on Tuesday, I am going to introduce a pretty impressive judge here in Harris County. Jerry Simoneau was elected judge of Harris County Probate Court 1 in 2019. He is a 1992 graduate of the University of Houston, where he earned 2 concurrent degrees, one in business administration and the other in French, of course. In 2001, he received his JD from South Texas College of Law, where he also taught briefly as an adjunct professor from 2006 to 2007. He was the managing partner at Simoneau Law Firm, which was later Simoneau and Watson, from 2001 to 2009 and 2014 to 2018. During his hiatus, he served as a staff attorney in Probate Court 1 from 2009 to 2010 and went on to join the litigation team at Galligan and Manning from 2011 to 2013. 2 of his cases are cited in Johansson's Texas Estates Codes Annotated and O'Connor's Texas Rules of Civil Trials. In addition to working full-time as a probate, litigation, and appellate attorney, he also served as an associate judge in the Houston Municipal Courts from 2015 through 2018. Judge Simoneau is an avid sailor and regularly competes in sailing races along the Gulf Coast. In 2016, when travel to Cuba was relaxed, he and his husband, Christopher Bound, helped organize the first group of U.S. sailors to sail privately owned boats into the Havana Harbor since 1958. It's amazing. And he competed in a sailing regatta along the Cuban coast. Jerry Simoneau and Christopher Bound, both longtime Road Women members, will celebrate their 29th wedding anniversary on December 12th. So please help me welcome our moderator for this evening, Judge Jerry.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm humbled. Thank you very much, Kat. Welcome everybody. This is the panel of Democratic candidates for the Court of Criminal Appeals. And I am very excited to even participate in a small way as a moderator, even though it sounded like I was running for office with that introduction. I'm not. I'm staying right where I am in Probate Court number 1. In 2022, I'll be running again for that same position. But we have some extraordinary candidates running for the Court of Criminal Appeals that I want you all to get to know better. And so I have to say, though, that as a judge, I'm prohibited from endorsing any single candidate. However, I can tell you that you should vote for every Democrat on the ballot from the very top to the very bottom. That I can tell you. So I would like to first have Judge Elizabeth Davis Frizzell. Would you please introduce yourself? You're running for place 3 on the Court of Criminal Appeals.
Yes, thank you, Jerry. And thank you guys so much for having us. It is an honor to be here. I am honored to be the Democratic nominee for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, place 3. I have been a judge for 20 years and practicing criminal law for 27. I started as a municipal court judge, and then I became a county court judge, a district court judge, and now I'm running for the Court of Criminal Appeals. I've been a judge on every level other than the appellate court. And let me tell you why the court that I'm running for is so important. This is not just the appellate court, it's the highest criminal court in the state of Texas. This is the court that all of the death penalty cases have a direct appeal to. So if a case is heard by a jury and the verdict is the death penalty, that case comes straight to each of us. And by the way, none of us are running against each other. Judge Birmingham and Judge Tina U. Clinton are my colleagues. We're all running for this particular court. This court has 9 judges. And if all 3 of us make it to that court, it can make a big difference in balance, in fairness. And over the time that I've been an attorney practicing criminal law, my experience in trying cases, I've tried everything from rape, robbery, murder, capital murder. My experience as a judge will help me on this court. And I think what will help me more than anything is just my interaction with people. I understand that whenever I preside over a case or whenever I represent someone, that there's a life that is impacted by the outcome of that case and a whole family that's impacted, a husband, a wife, children, kids. And I consider that whenever I handle a case. And that's something that you should be looking for when you're trying to decide who should you vote for. All of us are strong candidates and all of us care about people. So I think that combination is going to make the best combination for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. I'm married, I have 2 children, I have a daughter in college. We just found out today they're not going to have in-person college anymore. Every day it changes. She's in California. So every day it changes and we're all adjusting. My son just graduated from high school. Any of you that have children, I know you're making the same adjustments that we are. And it's important that you elect someone who is an everyday person that understands your everyday struggles in life. We don't just hear the death penalty cases. We'll review all of the cases that make it to the Court of Criminal Appeals that have been appealed, meaning the trial court judges, if they didn't get it right, we get a chance to say they didn't get it right and they have to go back and redo it. That's what I want to do. I want to make sure it's fair and balanced. Now, I want to do that before someone has spent 20 years in the penitentiary for an offense that they did not commit, or 25 or even 5. I want to make sure we get it right the first time. So thank you guys so much for having me. Elizabeth Davis Frizzell for Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, place 3.
All right, thank you very much, Judge. And running for place 4 on the Court of Criminal Appeals is Judge Tina U. Clinton.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Kat, and to Road Women and all of our sponsors. Thank you for the opportunity to spend an evening with you and to talk to you about so many of these important issues that are facing Texans and the representation that we do not have on the highest criminal court in the state of Texas. My name is Tina Clinton, and I am right now a sitting district judge in Dallas County. Very similarly to Judge Frizzell, I was a prosecutor, a defense attorney, a municipal court judge, a county court judge, and now a district court judge. I have 25 years of experience strictly in criminal law. And it is my honor to be the Democratic nominee for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, place 4. As Judge Frizzell has already talked about, our experience in the trial courts are vast. And it's one of the things that's actually missing in the highest criminal court. The highest criminal court, being an appellate court, reads the records and see things on paper. But if you haven't been in the courtroom, if you haven't been a participant in a trial, if you don't know what it's like to handle victims and defendants and their families, you do not see the reality of what is going on in a courtroom. If you have not spent time in these courtrooms, then what and how a law is interpreted and actually utilized as is something that you may never perceive and never really understand. The 3 of us can bring that experience to the highest criminal court in Texas. Currently, that highest criminal court has been overturned multiple times by the Supreme Court of Texas. And I know we all talk about how not liberal the Supreme Court of the United States is. But the United States Supreme Court has, in multiple cases, not only have had to touch a case from the Court of Criminal Appeals once, but sometimes twice because they keep getting it wrong. That's the highest court in Texas right now for criminal affairs. And that should not be the state of affairs for Texans. I believe that our values are not represented. I believe that our diversity is not represented. I believe that our experience that we need is not up there. This is our opportunity in 2020 to make that happen. Internal polling shows that we are very close to these courts. And I think in November, with your help, if you can get the word out, if you can let people know how important these courts are, that we will break that 25-year dry spell and that we will finally get justice and fairness in the state of Texas. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Tina Clinton, and it's my pleasure and honor to be here with you tonight.
All right, thank you, Judge Clinton. And running for place number 9 is Judge Brandon Birmingham.
Thank you, Judge. I really do appreciate the introduction, and it's always good to be here among you folks who are so vocal and active and curious about how your criminal courts and the Supreme Court, I heard there was quite a showing on Tuesday night, are going to look in November. I do want to brag a little bit about my 2 colleagues. I don't know if they're going to say it, but I want to say it. When we win in November, and we are going to win in November, Judge Elizabeth Frizzell will be the first African-American female elected to the Court of Criminal Appeals. When we win in November, Judge Tina Clinton will be the first Asian-American female elected to the Court of Criminal Appeals. I will not be the first white male elected to the Court of Criminal Appeals, okay? But I will be one who is, I'm very excited to bring our in the trenches experience. Let me just ask y'all, your idea, your view of the criminal justice system in 2020, is that this criminal justice system that you want to be a part of? Is that what you envision as fair and balanced and just? Are you receiving justice from these courts? I'll submit to you that the Court of Criminal Appeals is the highest court. They set the tone for the entire state. And if you're dissatisfied, if you've heard stories over the last 30 years or so where lawyers fall asleep and it's okay for their verdict to stand even though their guy was convicted, if you've just gotten the feeling that things are not the way they're supposed to be, well, then I'm here to tell you, I believe in my heart of hearts that we are the solution to that problem. When you get right down to it, experience matters, experience counts. These courts need to be fair, they need to be balanced, and I do believe that that's what we're going to bring. My name is Brandon Birmingham. Probably should have said that at the beginning. I am one of the presiding judges in Dallas County. Before that, was a prosecutor for a number of years at the Dallas County DA's office, where I had the honor, the privilege, the pleasure of working on some cases where people were exonerated by DNA evidence or faulty eyewitness testimony, things like that. I got to see those cases up close. I got to sit in living rooms and got to try those cases to jurors. It's that type of background and experience that does indeed forge discretion. Make no mistake about it. When you talk about whether a judge is a good one or a bad one, it really comes down to their discretion, and that discretion comes from their life experience. I believe that's what sets me apart, and I believe that's what's going to set this entire slate, all 7 of the Democratic candidates, apart in 2020. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Brandon Birmingham, and I can't wait to answer some of your questions.
Well, thank you, Judge Birmingham. And you were talking about breaking barriers, and Judge Frizzell and Judge Clinton talked about it too. Another barrier that I noticed is that for the first time in history, if the 3 of you are elected, you will swap the composition of the Court of Criminal Appeals from 4 women and 5 men to 6 women and 3 men. You'll be for the first time a woman majority, and the Supreme Court, if the Democrats win there, will also be 6 women and 3 men. Judge Frizzell, can you talk a little bit more about breaking barriers and what that means to you?
Sure. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about this. It's a shame that in 2020, we're the first of anything. When I first started my legal career with the Department of Justice, I was the first African-American female in the Dallas office of the Department of Justice. And I was young, I was fresh, I was new, I was surprised I was the first anything. I didn't even know that until I got there. In my mind, I was thinking, it's what year did I graduate? 1992. It's 1992, you gotta be kidding me. Well, here I am in 2020, again, the first. But I'm hoping that we're the first, but it's breaking a barrier so we bring many, many more people behind us, so that there are so many women that say they can do it. Many times when I mentor young people, I have a lot of women that say, I never really thought I could do it, but then when I met you in person, you came to my school and spoke, or I had a chance to talk to you one-on-one, I think maybe I can do it. And that's what I want people to know, understand, and believe. I think it's the beginning of a trend of more women in leadership, empower us understanding, yes, we're mothers, we're wives, we're daughters. My parents are in their 80s, so I'm taking care of them, as well as I have teenagers that are in college. So there might be a lot of you that are kind of in that same position. And we have so many different responsibilities, but we also have jobs and experience that gives us the ability to do something like this. I don't think it's an accident that I've been a judge on all the different levels and tried all the different cases and been at the criminal court for 27 years. I think it's important I take that experience to the highest court. And I think it can be done by men and women. It just happens to mostly be women this time. And I'm excited.
I think it's wonderful. Judge Clinton, can you give us a perspective, your own perspective about what it means to break a barrier?
It's a very interesting feeling because, you know, when I got elected for the first time in Dallas County, I was the first Asian American at all, man or woman, to be elected into the criminal courthouse. Like Harris County, our courts are specific jurisdiction courts. So we have criminal courts, civil courts, probate courts, and we have the same setup as Harris County, just less courts. And it was just interesting. It was something that I really didn't, I knew that there were judges that didn't look like me, that they were not indicative of my background. But I really didn't strive to be the first. In this case, I'm very honored to be the first. But again, my goal is to be a good judge that represents all Texans. But I also do think that it is very important that when Texans look at the court, that they say, I see that there is diversity, that there is someone who looks like me. It may not be that all of them do, but at least one. And I think that makes a great deal of difference to the confidence that Texans may have with some of the decisions that are coming out. In addition to being the first Asian American that would sit on that highest court, I don't know this, and please someone fact check me and then send me a message. I believe I may be the first one who was a first generation immigrant. And so I arrived in the United States when I was 4.5. I'm from South Korea. English is my second language, and I can never be president. But I'm honored to carry that experience with me, because in criminal law, the implications of criminal cases on immigration status is a very, very big issue. And to not have someone that has that experience means that that court does not have that kind of voice or experience that lends itself to the discussions that always occur when cases are being discussed. And so I'm proud to carry those experiences in and to help Texans who may have those issues pending in court, so that we can have true discussions and philosophical differences that actually is in discussion instead of just lockstepping.
Thank you very much, Judge Clinton. Judge Birmingham, what would you do to ensure that your staff is representative of the public on all levels?
Well, you've got to make sure that you recruit, that you travel around, you spend time in different communities. I know that it's important for me, at least now. I've learned so much by traveling around and spending time in different communities. I think you need to take that when you are sitting on the highest court in Texas. And I do want to be accessible to the people. I do want to make sure that I listen to them. And I also want to inspire them. I want to make sure that when we hire interns, for example, when we hire researchers, when we hire those briefing attorneys, the people that are going to help me write the opinions, that they reflect Texas. One of the biggest complaints that I hear all around is that these courts are out of touch. And I want to change that. And one of the very, very first things that you can do to change that is to diversify your staff. Make sure they come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, make sure that they come from different races, different genders, and only then can you achieve that necessary component of diversity that underlies true justice. And I want to tell you something else. I promise that I'll never stop learning. I mean, I don't want anybody to think that if you ascend and you get to be one of these types of judges that somehow you're like omniscient. Okay, we are not omniscient. We are still learning. We will continue to learn. We might have won an election, but that doesn't make us like a super genius. Okay, what I'm saying is that I promise I'll never stop learning. I want to learn from my staff. I want to put together the most diverse staff that I possibly can and go forward.
All right, thank you very much. And here's a question that's come in. And I'm going to I'll read the question, and whoever wants to answer, just let me know, and we'll take answers from whoever wants to respond. There's an overwhelming belief amongst people of color that the courts are inherently unfair to them and cannot be trusted. What would you do to change that belief?
Well, I can start. I think I'll start from the beginning, and then I'll let my two future colleagues jump in. I think the best way that I can describe it is, what should a legal decision come down to? And I think when you get right down to it, it should come down to the facts and the law and how those things interact. What it should not come down to is race, gender, color, creed, sexual orientation, gender identity. And let me throw some more out at you. Access to resources. One of the things we've learned, one of the biggest lessons we've learned from some of the cases where people had spent time in prison for crimes they didn't commit. I'm sad to say the exoneration capital of Texas and probably the United States is Dallas County, so I have quite a bit of experience here, was that the lawyers weren't prepared, that they were unprepared in their preparation, that they didn't have the funds to go forward. And I would submit to you that access to resources is one of the biggest things that we can eliminate from the equation about some of the decisions that have been made in these cases over the last 30 years. I think that will go a long way towards restoring some of the faith too. And let me throw this other one and this final one out at you. Besides access to resources, I would say another thing that should not enter into the equation is your political connections, who you know. We've seen some very high profile people be released recently, released from custody, even though they were convicted by juries, even though they pled guilty to certain crimes. And I think that erodes the public trust. Again, it violates the rule. Should be decided, the cases should be decided on the facts and the law and nothing else. And once you eliminate those other variables that I talked about, I think we've gone a long way to restoring public trust and confidence in the system. And I'll leave you with this. I said I was going to leave you with the other one, but I do want to say something else. I'm sorry, Judge Frizzell and Judge Clinton. Last thing, I promise. I want to say, if you feel like the system is unfair, the party that has been in control is in control, and they're the ones who have set up the system that you think is so unfair across our entire state. This court is a unanimous Republican. It has been a unanimous Republican court since 1994, I believe. It's a long time. Reputations are earned. We're trying to undo the reputations.
Thank you very much. And Judge Frizzell, I think you look like you wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Judge Brandon Birmingham just said. There is a perception that African Americans are sentenced more harshly. And it's not just a perception, it's a reality. Statistically, African Americans are sentenced more harshly. And if, like Judge Birmingham said, if you think it's not fair, and if you know the stats and African Americans, Hispanics, whoever it is if they're disproportionately sentenced on offenses, look who's been in power for the last 25 years, the Republicans. They have not only just won every election, they've never had an opponent in over 22 years. So think about that. If on your job, you can never be fired, no matter what you did, no matter how much you messed up, no matter what the perception was about whether you're doing a good or a bad job, you couldn't be fired. What kind of job do you think you would do? We haven't had anybody even run against these Republican judges that are on the highest criminal court in the state of Texas. But here we are, and we're here grading their papers. We're reviewing the cases that they've ruled on. We're checking to see, have they specifically been more harsh in sentencing to African Americans, to Hispanics, to anyone for any reason other than the facts of the case. Statistically, that's true. We're about to change that. I don't need anyone to give someone a leg up because they're Black, or because they're Hispanic, or because they're female. Just be fair. Just don't sentence someone more harshly because they're Black, or because they're Hispanic, or because they're female. And what I see the court that we have now doing is exactly that. We're here to change it. You can't just complain. You can't just say, oh man, that is so unfair. Somebody ought to do something about that. Well, here we are, but we can't do it alone. We need your vote. We need you to vote all the way up and all the way down the ticket and say, you know what, it's time for a change. We want some new leadership, experienced, trusted leadership, someone who's going to be fair so we don't have to complain. We'll know they're doing the right thing. So we're asking you to vote for the whole slate of us, and you can't go wrong if you do that.
I tried to unmute myself and it didn't work. Sometimes that happens on Zoom. Judge Clinton, do you have, would you like to add on to that?
I think the fact that there are 9 of them, I believe that because of the way that they have ruled in lockstep with each other, that you don't get an intellectual discourse where attorneys see that there is an acknowledgement that there has been disproportionate sentencing of Black and brown bodies. And that makes it very, very difficult when you don't even have an acknowledgement of that within the criminal justice system by the highest criminal court in Texas. One of the other things that I can talk about as an example is this. All 3 of us have been very, very adamant in our courts about making sure that bond issues get taken care of. The legislature did not take care of bail bond issues in the last 2 legislative sessions. And even though there was some discussion by the Supreme Court to the legislature, there was no leadership about bail bond issues within the state of Texas, even after the federal case came down in Harris County. And so there has been no leadership. And yet judges are responsible about educating not only the public, but also the legislature about what is constitutional, what is not constitutional, what is needed. They have not had that kind of leadership that we expect out of people that should be sitting on the highest criminal court in the state of Texas. And so when we discuss issues about lack of fairness, it's a lack of leadership. It's a lack of willingness to understand that there are issues that are in the criminal justice system that have not yet been dealt with. And if the highest court doesn't deal with them, who will? Who are we waiting for? And so I think that if we would like to see justice and fairness to minority communities and individuals that are charged with crimes, it will not start until this highest court is dealt with by the voters.
All right, thank you very much. This one sounds a little technical, but I think it might be from a lawyer. I don't know. But there is a perception, and maybe it's a reality, that pro se litigants in particular file motions in district criminal courts that are not ever resolved because they're on submission and there's no technical presentment. However, this person wants to know, well, the Court of Criminal Appeals doesn't really have rules making authority. That's more with the Texas Supreme Court, but the Court of Criminal Appeals does have a say with the Texas Judicial Administration rules. So would you consider a change to the rules of judicial administration to require judges to rule on those petitions that are filed by these pro se litigants who are usually post-conviction in jail?
I would, and I'll tell you why. It's because one thing that I've learned in my experience there in Dallas County is that, these cases never stop. A jury may rule or a plea may be entered, but the truth never stops developing. And sometimes it just takes a little while to uncover it. So I am opposed to any procedural measure that would thwart anybody from bringing to a court's attention an injustice. And I don't care whether it comes from an inmate or, I don't know, the superstar Clarence Darrow of appeals, for the country. It doesn't matter to me where they come from, because we're trying to get at the truth. And that's one of the things that I think is a big difference here. It's a difference of dignity on the one hand, the dignity for the individual versus deference to the process or deference to the legislature or abdicating the independence of the judiciary. And I don't like that. I'm not in favor of that. I do want to just say in all candor, I don't have a policy in mind that I'm ready to spit out, but the idea would be that anything that impedes anybody's access to justice should be dealt with accordingly. And I want to tell you too, that is one of the underpinnings for the distrust in our system, is that people do not feel like they have access to these courts and they deserve it.
Would anyone else like to chime in?
I can chime in. So even in this time of COVID, where we are told that we must be virtual, where we must be virtual as much as possible, I'm holding hearings out of my house. And as many of us, we have a part of our house that we have now cornered as an office, whether it was before or not. But even then, I go in once a week in the evening. I actually choose Friday nights because after people leave on Friday night, they're not doubling back. And so I have the luxury of going into my chambers and having a little bit of time alone. And one of the things that I go in there for is these particular types of pro se letters. It's very important that you take a look at them and that you not just gloss over them because they're pro se, but that you actually read them to see what it is that needs to be looked at and to have them reviewed. We also have staff attorneys and others that review them and help us out when there are too many of them. And sometimes it does get to be overwhelming, but they still need to be reviewed. It doesn't matter whether it takes all weekend. they need to be reviewed. And so though I cannot tell you what policy I would make, what I can tell you is that I take that experience with me. Because I've been a district judge and because I understand the significance of what can arise from those types of letters, the fact that at some point that you may need to look at them and see whether resources must be placed, such as counsel, so that they can further those arguments, those experiences are one that I will not forget and take that experience with me. And I think that goes back to what we were saying. Our experience as trial judges, our experience of dealing with the actual work that comes in at that base level gives us an understanding that is not there at the current level of the court. And so, so I hope that for the individual who asked that question, that gives you a little bit of an understanding of our background.
And Jerry, if I could just add briefly,
yes,
I'll be very brief. But I do think that pro se motions should be heard. As a criminal district court judge, I used to read all my letters, like Judge Tina Clinton said. It's so important. Some of them may be something that you cannot respond to, but there could always be something that is critically important to be addressed. And appeals are very expensive. If you've already been convicted and you're in Texas Department of Criminal Justice, you might have the money to have an attorney to file an appeal, so you're filing it yourself. I represented someone who was wrongfully convicted of an offense. He ended up spending 16 years in the penitentiary for an offense he did not commit. He was later exonerated through DNA testing, but he filed pro se for himself from the penitentiary for many years. And I went through the files before I started helping him on his case to read through everything he had filed. And many times there may have been one prong he didn't completely get right. A couple of times there were two prongs he didn't get right that the law required him to put in his motions, but he was trying. We need to at least review those because the law eventually changed where he didn't have to meet all of that. They gave him his DNA testing, but he was trying to get a DNA test. Yeah. I think it's important that we at least review it as judges on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals so we know whether there's a legal issue that needs to be heard by the court.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to stay unmuted, so I don't have a problem. Well, thank you, Judge Frizzell. That prompted a question. Is there a particular case or life experience that drove you to become an attorney or run for judge? And if you could talk about that.
Sure. Oh, to become a judge?
Or an attorney?
Yes. I decided I wanted to be a lawyer at the age of 12. Oh. That was because of my parents. I used to talk all the time. And my parents, one day my dad said, well, you just talk all the time. Anything I say, you have an argument or I come back. And, you know, I had to come back respectfully. It had to be articulate because my dad was a Baptist pastor. He didn't tolerate back talk. So I had to give a cogent argument. Well, Dad, if you let me do this, then I could do that. So I started learning how to argue intelligently. And he said, well, you know, you ought to just become a lawyer and get paid for it. I was like, you can get paid for this? Maybe I should become a lawyer. So I started thinking about becoming a lawyer. Now, why I became a judge, I didn't always know I was going to be a judge. I didn't always want to be a judge. But when I started trying cases, I was in private practice for 13 years before I became a county or elected judge. And there were so many cases that I tried in front of all Republican judges at that time, just like on the court we're running for, all the judges in Dallas County were Republicans. So many cases I tried. I didn't feel like the judges were fair. Some of them weren't listening. It's like, hurry up and get done so I can issue my ruling. I had one criminal district court judge right here in Dallas tell me that. He told me, oh, I've already made up my mind. You don't need a hearing. I was like, what? How could you have made up your mind? I haven't even I have 13 witnesses in the hallway. So he still wouldn't give me the hearing. I said, well, according to the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, you're required to give me a hearing, even though it's a probation violation, even though you say automatically you're going to stick with whatever the state says and whatever the probation officer says. I have a right to a hearing and I want my hearing. And he looked up at me and he was very mad. He's like, okay, well, get in the courtroom. I'll give you your hearing. So I knew it wasn't going to go so well that day, and it didn't, but I did get my hearing. But I felt like a judge should not have made up their mind before they hear the case. And that made me think we always complain about the judges not being fair, but we never run against them. So I decided to run against them, and the rest is history. But that's a part of what made me decide to run for judge.
Very good. Judge, Judge Clinton, is there a case or life experience that you had that gave you some motivation to become an attorney or run for judge?
So I was a philosophy major, and that colored quite a bit of the road that I decided I wanted to take when I went to law school. So I wasn't quite as young as Judge Frizzell, but I was 14, and I decided that contrary to my parents' wishes, who wanted me to be a doctor, that I wanted to be a lawyer. And so they settled. They settled. And when I went to undergrad and I chose a philosophy major, one of the things that I decided was that my passion would be for civil rights. And I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. And I have to tell you that in the time frame that I came out, it was not quite as easy to find practices that would say that they were civil rights firms or lawyers specializing in civil rights. And what I found instead, because that road didn't seem to open up for me, was an internship, a clerkship with the 5th District Court of Appeals, which is the intermediary appellate court that sits for Dallas County and 5 other counties. And I found a justice who liked my writing style and selected me. And she gave me a criminal case and a civil case. And it was unfair. The criminal case was a murder case and the civil case was a contracts case. And she asked me, which do you think is more interesting? And it was really hands down. Of course, the criminal case was much more interesting. And she said, if you find this to be interesting, then maybe you should go look at the DA's office and see if you can start your career there. And that's exactly what I did. And that started a life as a trial lawyer. That started a life living in the courthouse and seeing how judges ruled on cases and how they can make a difference or cannot make a difference because their unwillingness. And that drove my career in the direction that it did. So I was very fortunate, even though I didn't get to be a civil lawyer, I get to deal with civil rights every day. And I'm privileged to do that.
And Judge Birmingham, the same question.
It was a movie called A Few Good Men that did it for me back in high school. I thought that was a great movie. The courtroom drama was wonderful. I grew up watching Perry Mason with my mom. I think probably had something to do with it as well. Then I got to be at the DA's office, and my time in the cold case unit, I was privileged and honored to be the chief of the cold case unit for a couple of years. And we worked in conjunction with the conviction integrity unit, one of the, I think it was the first of its kind in Texas that was created by Craig Watkins. And there was a handful of cases, but one in particular stuck out for me where we exonerated 2 men who had been wrongfully convicted of a crime that they did not commit. And they spent a lot of time in prison. And we got to be able to try and hold accountable the people who actually did commit the crime. And along the way, I got to be friends with one of the exonerees named Christopher Scott. He has a wonderful program that he's developed called the House of Renewed Hope. We played basketball together, and that experience alone, just that personal interaction with him has taught me more about the way that this system ought to be and the way that it is not. Than anything else that I've read and saw in a movie or read in a book somewhere. And I think if you wanted to say what caused you to want to be a judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals, that experience most codified my desire to do that. That was such an injustice, and I just don't want to let anything like that happen ever again.
And thank you. And Judge Clinton, what do you believe is the greatest obstacle or obstacles to achieving justice?
Oh, so many things. So many things. I don't know that we can go through all of them, but I can tell you that that good people must run for offices, and they must bring their values and their experiences in. It is, you know, a long time ago, my mother said that sometimes you have to be on the inside to make sure that change occurs. And even though we are seeing Americans rise up in numbers like we have in a very long time to express their desire for change in the criminal justice system in the United States, That change can only happen if people in power embrace that, and if they take those ideas that America promises and actually puts it into action, not only in decisions, but in laws and holding accountable people. Those are the types of things that must be done by institutions and people in power. And so part of, I think, the honor and privilege that the three of us have is not only to be your Democratic nominees, but to be your Democratic nominees in 2020. Because 2020 is a historic year for so many reasons. And to give us the opportunity to represent you and to represent Texans in this historic time with this historic voice is something that we do not take lightly and that we do not overlook. So thank you. Thank you for that honor.
All right, Judge Birmingham, what do you see as the greatest obstacles to justice?
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind first is the access that people have to the courtrooms and to the elected officials that run the courtrooms. We see in cities like Dallas that the people have more access, and I would say that places like Dallas are pretty progressive, and we have a good track record recently of trying to make the system better. I just don't see that in Austin. I really don't see that from the leadership of this state. And I think accountability, accessibility, and transparency are absolute keys to restoring justice. And I can only promise that those are three things that I will never forget once I'm elected. And I think none of us will forget those things.
All right, thank you. Judge Frizzell, what do you see are the greatest obstacles to justice?
The greatest obstacles to justice, in particular to the court that I'm running for, I think a lot of it is in sentencing. There are a lot of cases where maybe someone did commit the offense, but they might be deserving of probation. Probation's for the guilty, not for the not guilty. I had someone tell me, a prosecutor many years ago, tell me, well, if he didn't do it, I'll give him a deferred probation. Really? If he didn't do it, how about a not guilty or dismissal? But that was their mindset at that time. Sometimes the person committed the offense, but they don't deserve 20 years, they deserve 10. Or they don't deserve 60 years, they deserve 20. Or maybe it's not a life case. It's something where they might see the light of day at one point. And the reason I say that is a lot of times with some of these death penalty cases, they shouldn't even be death penalty. They should be life without the possibility of parole, or just life in general. And many of the felony cases that are reviewed by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals have come down to sentencing. Well, what happens in sentencing? That's when the defense lawyers can present mitigating evidence. Mitigating evidence is just what I'm talking about, something you can show to the jury to show why this person should get a lesser sentence. If you really don't care about that person, if you really don't care about the case, if you really kind of think they did it, or maybe they didn't, but you devalue them, you might not try as hard to find the mitigating evidence and to present it. And there are cases right now, here recently, when the US Supreme Court has overturned the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and said you have to do it again. The court has ordered a new review of many cases. And there are specific cases I'm thinking of. I know I'm not supposed to comment on cases in particular, so I won't name them, but I could. But it's not fair to the defendant, to the defendant's family, or even to the victim if each side doesn't do their part, the defense lawyer, the prosecutor, and the judge. And too often what I see in the cases I'm reviewing on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, they're not holding both sides' feet to the fire to make sure all the mitigating evidence is admitted. That's what makes our criminal justice system more fair.
All right, thank you. And that prompted several questions, Judge Frizzell. One of them was actually about Moore versus Texas, where the Criminal Courts of Appeals redetermination that Bobby James Moore does not have an intellectual disability and is thus eligible for the death penalty was inconsistent with the Supreme Court's decision in Moore versus Texas. But I know that that's been remanded back, so you probably don't want to talk about that. I just want to mention that because somebody brought that up. But another person writes in, and it's I think, Judge Frizzell, you might have prompted this as well. I'm just learning now about what this court does. Do the justices in the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals look at previous criminal cases, perhaps involving death penalty punishment, in which the defendants may have really been innocent and not guilty after the fact?
Yes, they do look at that, but there has to be a motion. We call it a writ of habeas corpus. There has to be a motion filed to get it up to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. And then, yes, that is a part of what we review, what we would be reviewing, and what the current judges on this court review. Absolutely, because now you have organizations like the Innocence Project that will file writs on behalf of defendants who are incarcerated. Sometimes defendants in prison do file writs on their own pro se. But yes, if there's something filed so it gives us the legal authority to hear it, we absolutely review those.
Thank you. And Judge Clinton, did you have something to add to that, or?
No, but I was going to go back to the Bobby Moore case. So the Bobby Moore case is fascinating, and it's actually over now, thanks to the U.S. Supreme Court.
I didn't know it had been resolved yet.
It is. And so what happened was in 1980, I'm going to try to go through this really fast because it's a long. In 1980, Mr. Moore was convicted of capital murder, and he was placed on death row. After many years later, the U.S. Supreme Court came up with a case, a Virginia case, that said that if you are intellectually disabled, you do not qualify for death penalty. Mr. Moore then filed a writ through his attorney saying that he was intellectually disabled. The trial court down in Houston in Harris County did findings, and they found that he was intellectually disabled, and they sent it up to the Court of Criminal Appeals. And if you hear singing, it's because my son is in the bath singing. So Mr. Moore went up to the Court of Criminal Appeals with this trial court finding that he was intellectually disabled, and the Court of Criminal Appeals decided that they would not follow that finding and that they made their own. That case got appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said the standard that you used gives a lay definition of intellectual disability that will increase the likelihood that someone who is intellectually disabled will actually slip through and become executed. And so they sent it back, clarifying the standards and telling them what to do. The Court of Criminal Appeals, in their wisdom, pretty much wrote almost the same exact opinion and sent it back up again. And this time, not only did Mr. Moore have his attorneys file to petition for the Supreme Court, Kim Ogg, who was the DA during that time, filed along with Mr. Moore, asking for petition to be heard in this particular case because she believed that Mr. Moore was intellectually disabled. The Supreme Court received it, and they actually made a finding, which is very rare, that they made a finding that Mr. Moore was intellectually disabled. So a couple of months ago, Mr. Moore was automatically or given parole because what they said was because of the time that it spent, Mr. Moore had no opportunities to even have parole hearings. And so many of the legislators actually asked the parole board to give him parole because he missed opportunities that he should have been given under the Supreme Court case that says that intellectually disabled people should not be executed. And he missed all of that. And so that is how that case concluded with the Supreme Court's intervention.
Fascinating. That is fascinating. And that brought up another question, which is more general, and I'll hand this over to Judge Birmingham. Can you explain why your race is so important and the real world benefits of electing Democrats to these seats?
It's important because these issues affect real people in real courtrooms. I can't help but think of Bobby Moore and the families of Mr. Moore and his loved one and his friends. I can't help but think of the victims in that particular case too, that those cases, there's no finality in them. There was no resolution to those cases for years and years. And if you ever wanted to know why it's important for a different approach to be brought to the Court of Criminal Appeals, then yes, please study that particular case. It's very telling. These cases are, we make decisions in these cases, and the decisions reach every courthouse in Texas. They set the standard. The rules and the decisions that we make shape the way that plea bargaining happens. They shape the way that trials are run. They shape the way that people interact with this courthouse. It's a question of dignity versus deference. It's a question of individual rights. It's a question of accessibility and transparency. Some of these judges have been in power for 20 years, and you probably don't even know who they are, and I think that that's a problem. They're not accessible. Why is it important to elect folks like this? I would just caution you. I don't want to just say vote for somebody because of their party affiliation. I would say, and I would encourage you to vote for us because of our qualifications. Vote for us because of our experience. Vote for us because of the way that we look at cases. It's that mindset, it's that discretion that will restore fairness to these courts all across the state.
All right, thank you very much. Judge Frizzell, can you explain or help us understand at the Court of Criminal Appeals, what cases do the justices have to hear, or what are they mandated to hear? And are there cases that are just up for kind of discretionary review, like at the Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court?
Jerry, that's an excellent question. It is up for discretion on many cases, and they definitely exercise that discretion. There are many cases that the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals right now does not hear, will not hear. And too often, many of the cases that they do hear are rubber stamped. That's a part of what makes us unsafe as a society. The reason Texas and Dallas in particular, I know everyone within the sound of my voice is not in Dallas, but I mentioned Dallas because we're #1 in wrongful convictions, and that helps Texas be #1 in wrongful convictions. And a part of that is every time you wrongfully convict someone, the real rapist, murderer, whoever it is that committed that offense is still out there. While we're looking at this person for 10, 15, 18, 20 years. And even in the example that I gave you earlier, that's just what happened. He was accused of rape. Ended up he did not do, and the real rapist was still out there. And it's possible that person is still committing more crimes. And in many of the instances, and I know Judge Birmingham knows it, once we found out who actually committed the offense, they've committed many, many more crimes, some of them murders, by the time we actually catch the real perpetrator. So it is important that the court use their discretion wisely. We should be hearing so many of these cases that, in my opinion, they're not hearing now and should be heard. And I'll get a chance to do something about that, to issue a ruling that becomes the case law for the lower courts to give them guidance to follow. As a trial lawyer and as a lawyer who does appeals, we look for that guidance from the higher court because it sets precedents. And when the Court of Criminal Appeals does not rule, it makes it more difficult for the trial lawyers and the appellate lawyers to have guidance on where they should go legally in criminal cases.
And just as a follow-up, how many justices must vote to hear a particular case?
It depends. Some cases, well, I was going to say some cases are en banc, some cases are per curiam, meaning some cases the entire court, all 9 judges will hear it. Some cases there will just be 3. And let's say I was not one of the 3, I can write a dissenting opinion saying, I don't agree with that. So it varies. Not all cases, and some people don't know this, not all cases are heard by the entire court. It just depends on the issue. Some of them is just 3 judges.
Oh, okay. And well, my question was, do the justices in the Court of Criminal Appeals have to vote to decide which cases that are discretionary, that they're actually going to review? And like at the Texas Supreme Court, it takes 4 justices to vote to get a review. Is it the same in the Court of Criminal Appeals?
That's a good question. You said, do they have to vote to decide if it's going to be per curiam or en banc? Is that what you mean?
No, if it's going to be reviewed at all.
Except for death penalty cases.
Right. They have to review the death penalty cases. You're talking about non-death penalty cases?
Yeah,
right.
Yes, Judge.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So that's what I wanted to establish first, because I wasn't sure. I'm not that knowledgeable about the Court of Criminal Appeals, and I imagine I'm more in line with our audience than I am with experienced folks like you. But the question then is, what in your background makes you the best person to convince other justices to hear a case? Because there will only be 3 Democrats on the Court of Criminal Appeals, so you'll have to get at least one more person. Well, you may not agree with each other too, but you'll need to get, and that may happen.
That's
so
true.
what in your background, what are your skill sets to be able to convince that fourth person to hear a case that you really think deserves to be heard?
And I think you're right, Jerry. That's when your advocacy skills come in. If I can convince a jury, and I was pretty good as a trial lawyer, if I can convince a jury to find somebody not guilty because they really are not, even though it looks like they are, even though if you stopped and didn't listen anymore after the state rested its case, if you didn't listen further and listen to the defense, you may say, oh, I've made up my mind, until they hear the defense. It's those same skills. You have to relate to a jury, just like you have to relate to our colleagues, our other judges that will be on that court. And then you have to have a good factual basis, a good legal basis. We called it application in law school, how you're applying the law to the facts. I think each of us are pretty good about taking the law, applying it to the facts, and using that to convince the other judges, really, do you think this is fair and just? Is this the best application of the law? I know it's supposed to be in the light most favorable to the trier of fact. We weren't there, we weren't the trial lawyers, but even considering that, is it possible that maybe this is not a case that should be supported, rubber stamped? Because I think right now the perception is that there's a rubber stamp for many of the decisions that the trial judges are making.
And Judge Clinton, how would you, or what in your background would help you to convince other justices to take a case that really deserves to be heard by the Court of Criminal Appeals?
So I have been honored to sit on the board for the Texas Center for Judiciary. The Texas Center for Judiciary is, I believe, the largest nonprofit in the state of Texas. And all it does is it educates judges. That is their sole mission. It does not have a partisanship, but the membership clearly is made up of the judges that sit in the state of Texas, the appellate justices, and the highest criminal courts, the two highest criminal courts, the district judges and the county judges. And it was my honor to be on that board selected by my fellow judges. That is judges from all corners of Texas. Many of them are not from my political affiliation, but we were able to work as board members and to respect each other. And when circumstances brought about where I rolled off, the board actually nominated me to bring me back for a certain period of time. And I actually resigned because the Court of Criminal Appeals funds the Texas Center for Judiciary. And I did not want there to be any issues with the fact that I was running. And so I say that to say that I was able to, in the tenure that I have been a judge, to earn their respect. I've been on their board. I taught ethics to my peers that are judges. I've also been one of the instructors for the College of New Judges. So they trusted me to be able to teach new judges coming in, regardless of partisanship, about their duties as judges. I tend to think that that means that I may be seen as someone that is good at what I do, someone reasonable regarding the law, and that should be heard equally. And so I hope that I take those relationships with me and that experience working on that board with me so that we can maybe convince one or two other folks that may be reviewing cases, making sure that Texans believe that we are doing our best to review as many cases may be something good, not only for the criminal justice system, but also for Texans in general and their faith in their courts.
All right, thank you. Judge Birmingham, same question.
I would say my experience in specialty courts is one pretty good example. How do you do it? You identify what the moral value is of a decision or the potential decision, and then you find common ground and you advance that particular moral value. I'll give you an example. When I first became a judge, that was in 2015. There was a Republican named Susan Hawk who became the district attorney of Dallas County. She's a Republican, I'm a Democrat. We, though, figured out that in Dallas County, there was not a youthful offenders program where, I don't know about you all, I've done some things between the ages of 18 and 24 that I regret, and I'm glad I wasn't convicted of because it would have had a horrible impact on the rest of my life. That's the moral truth. We've all been there before. We all understand that felony convictions can be bad. We all understand that people do make mistakes and they should be redeemed. she and I were able to find that common moral ground, and we started the AIM program. It's on top of my mind now because we're about to have our graduation. We're about to graduate our 130th person. That's almost 2,000 years of potential time in the penitentiary that we have avoided. We did that together. When she left office, Faith Johnson came in and we continued the program. She didn't have to continue that program, but again, she believed in that moral value. And I think that's just one example of how you can reach across the aisle, so to speak, and engage the other person, hear them, respect them, listen to them, and try to persuade them that what you're doing is for the right reasons.
All right, thank you. And Judge Birmingham, I'm going to come back to you on this this next question, and I'll ask all of you to respond as well. Do you consider writing, if you, or rather, let me set up, if you find yourself not in the majority in a decision that the Court of Criminal Appeals is making, do you consider writing a dissenting opinion important? And if so, why?
Absolutely, yes. And the reason why, it goes back to that one moral truth that we were talking about before, Judge, and that would be access to courts. You know, it's one thing to talk about this Court of Criminal Appeals and, you know, the merits of constitutional law and all those things, but these are cases. These are real people. And if I was involved in a case that was being heard by the Court of Criminal Appeals, I would want to know why a judge did what they did, why they voted a certain way, and what was the outcome? What drove the outcome in this case? So for their sake, for the individual dignity, yes, you should write a dissenting opinion and explain why you are dissenting, explain why you disagree. The next layer above that is because it's giving a nod to the lawyers to look at things. You might want to clarify precisely what the limits of that holding are. You want to explain how this might play off in the future, or what this does not mean and why you are so opposed to it. All of those things go towards the next part of that thing about restoring confidence in our criminal justice system, which is transparency. They deserve, the people, the litigants, the victims, the police officers, the district attorneys, the criminal defense bar deserve to know what you're thinking when you make a decision. That is what writing a dissenting opinion is. For that matter, it's why it's important to write a concurring opinion, or if you're honored and lucky enough to write the majority opinion, to write it clearly and concisely.
Judge Frizzell, same question.
Yes, absolutely. I think dissenting opinions are critical. As a lawyer, you can cite a dissenting opinion in your appellate brief. Justice Thurgood Marshall wrote many dissenting opinions on the US Supreme Court. It's important because it lets other lawyers know what some of the other judges were thinking on that court who may not have agreed with the opinion. And not even just for the lawyers, but anybody that reads it, whether it's the family, friends, whoever reads that opinion, trying to understand, why did this judge rule this way? If they were thinking something and we can articulate that in the dissenting opinion, and they say, you know what, that's what I was thinking too. I didn't really agree with that position. That can possibly help move the needle down the line for other cases, just knowing not all of us agreed with this ruling, but that was the majority ruling. But it also gives you something to argue with as far as quoting a dissenting opinion. I think it's important that the public knows why we disagree with a majority opinion if we do disagree.
Thank you. Judge Clinton?
I think that is how law develops. I think that it is the intellectual ability for those on the highest courts and the appellate courts to talk about the philosophical differences regarding how a law can be seen, and to discuss those and to make sure that it perpetuates throughout the court system to understand that there may be more than one way to look at this particular law. Over time, those dissenting opinions sometimes become majority opinions, but they don't ever become majority opinions if someone doesn't actually put forth the intellectual argument so that it can be considered. And the fact that people are even discussing whether dissenting opinions have value shows that this court has not been doing that enough. That it's time for not only just diversity of backgrounds, it's also diversity of thoughts, and it must be put on paper so that our criminal justice system can not only grow, but that we can have true discussions in the manner in which the law saw discussions would actually happen. And that is through these types of opinions and means within the law.
All right, thank you so much, each of you. We've just about come to the end of our time, so I'm going to go ahead and have you do your closing remarks. We're not time limited, so take whatever time you want for your closing remarks. Say what if I didn't ask a question that you really wished I had asked, now's the time to talk about that too. So I'm going to go in reverse order of the way that you were introduced, and we'll start with place 9, Judge Birmingham.
Well, thank you very much. It's always an enlightening discussion. I really do enjoy answering these questions. And Judge Simoneau, you've been a wonderful host. I really do appreciate your time and your efforts this evening. And to those of you that I wish I could actually see and actually talk with and shake your hand and give you a hug and introduce myself and answer any questions that you have, I'm sorry that I can't. All I can just tell you is that I feel like we are in the midst of a historic election. We are fighting over the soul of our country. We're fighting over the soul of the state of Texas. And as it relates to this particular race, we are fighting over the soul for the Court of Criminal Appeals, the criminal justice system here in the state of Texas. And the decision that is made in November of 2020 is going to have ramifications for 30 Novembers from now. That's how these things work. It's the highest court in the land. These decisions matter and they are lasting. I would just encourage you, please, please vote all the way up and down the ballot. Please, please consider some of the things that we talked about tonight. Fairness, balance, transparency, accessibility, those are the cornerstones for a criminal justice system that we can all be proud of. We can shed that reputation that has been so, well, quite frankly, it's been earned over the last 30 years, but we can shed that and restore dignity over deference. I would encourage you, if you could, I don't see any questions in the chat. Maybe there's a different chat. You can visit me at judgebirmingham.com. You can email me, brandon@judgebirmingham.com. I would love to hear any other questions that you have. You can also follow me on Twitter. Gosh, I'm on all of them. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, @judgebirmingham would be a great way to continue this conversation. Give me a follow, give me a like, however you're supposed to do it in social media age. I'm still learning. But I would just encourage you to please look us all up. And I cannot wait for you to tell me how you took 20 people that you know and you made them vote in November. If you do that, if this group here does that, then we can change the future of this country, of this state, and of our criminal justice system. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you, Judge Birmingham. And our candidate, our Democratic candidate for place 4 is Judge Clinton.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the honor of being with you tonight. Judge Simoneau, thank you so much for an amazing job moderating. I know that that is not always simple. And so thank you for being with us and for your work on the courts in Harris County. To Road Women and the other hosting organizations, thank you so much for the honor. We would love to be with you in person, but we know that right now in Texas, that is not something that we can do. And so the fact that you give us this alternate means of being able to speak to you and to reach out to you is invaluable. We know that we have so much work to do in the state of Texas, and that 2020 is a year that we are looking at all sorts of challenges that we must overcome. The first is that I know that many people are going to be scared to go to the polls, and that is a fair and honest comment that we should not ignore. But we also know this, that our country and our state must have changes for us to have better lives. This epidemic, this pandemic is an example of that. Our children are looking at the possibility of going to schools with educators scared to teach and with families uncertain whether that means that COVID will be coming home with those children and what it means to not only the children's health, but also to the adults. This is not the life that we as Americans thought that we would have in 2020. Most of us are living a very vastly different life than what we planned this year. And it's not too late for us to change the course, not for our daily lives and not for the courts. But it all means that regardless of how scared we are, we must do the one thing that we must to change and begin that change. and that is go to the polls. We must not only go, we must convince all of our friends to go to the polls as well. And the other part is this. Campaigns do not occur in a vacuum. All of us need your help in getting the word out, in sharing videos, educating others who may not know that there are 3 candidates for the highest criminal court, or for the 4 Supreme Court candidates for the Supreme Court of Texas. We also need you to give if you can. For those who you can't, please, we're not asking you in times of economic trouble to do something that would take away from your family. That's not something that any of us would ask. But for those of you that can, these campaigns, because we're not able to go out and meet people, means that we must use other means. And sometimes that is digital, sometimes that is mail, and all of those take money. So if you're able, please pick someone, or please pick a group and give to them. And it doesn't really matter who it is, because Democratic voters mean Democratic voters for all of us. And please remind people to vote all the way down the ballot, because we do not have straight ballot ticket this time. We don't have a button that we can push that will click everyone up and down that ballot. And so we must go and make it into a step-by-step. Every D that you find, you must click, from the president all the way down to your local people, because the highest court cannot do it without the intermediary courts and our colleagues in the other courts. The president cannot do it without a Senate, and our local elected officials cannot do it without support from the state level and from the federal level. We are all interconnected, and that means that we all need votes. So thank you so much for your attention. I know that this has been a topic that not many of you may dive deeply into, but we appreciate the fact that you've been with us. And if there's any question that you have, I'd be honored to answer that. You can find me at Facebook, and my handle there is Judge Tina Clinton. Thank you very much. I look forward to having some communications with some of you, and look forward to being back in Harris County and spending a little bit more time closer to the election. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Clinton. Judge Frizzell.
Thank you so much, Judge Simoneau. You were a great moderator. You made it easy on us, and you helped us get our message out to all these people. And to Ms. Clemens, thank you for opening up the avenue so that we could talk to everyone and just relay our message. And to the Road Women, I love your name, the Road Women. When you're on the road, you're moving forward, and you can tell all of us are moving forward. We are not going to stop. I know you know we're tenacious. You know we couldn't have gotten to where we are now if we had stopped on the way, because you know we've all had challenges before we got here, because I know you have. Not only what's going on now with the pandemic, I know you've seen so many marches, and every time you turn on the TV, it seems like it's something negative. But before we ever got to 2020, each of you have had challenges in your lives, because your husbands, your wives, your mothers, I know it's the Road Women, but maybe some men are tuned in. If not, you guys forward this to your husbands and your friends and make sure they see it. But you've all had challenges. We have to get past those. And here's how you do it. If you have an issue like this that you know is this critical to your life, because we're unsafe when we have wrongful convictions. We're unsafe when we have a higher court rubber stamp a lower court, whether that person did it or not. We're unsafe when we're giving people much longer sentences than we really should be, spending more and more money on something we should not be spending it on. I'd rather take that money we spend on locking people up and put it toward probation fees, so clients don't even have to pay that. If you violate your probation, it won't be because of money. You don't know how many people violate probation just because they didn't have the probation fees, but that's another topic. The point is, here's our opportunity to do something about it. We're giving you that chance. We're offering ourselves up. We have our regular lives on the bench, in the courtroom, and we're doing this too, because we know how important it is. And we know you know how important it is. So here's my shameless plug for money. I got to give this to you now because my campaign team always says I forget to do this. Go to FrizzellForJudge.com. FrizzellForJudge.com. When I say 4, it's the number 4. FrizzellForJudge.com. That will tell you everything else about me that I didn't have time to say tonight. And you can donate money there. But it doesn't matter if you donate to me or to Judge Tina U. Clinton or Judge Brandon Birmingham or to the Democratic Party. I need you to donate. And I need you to go tell I like how Judge Birmingham said 20 people. I always say 10. Don't just tell 10. Tell 20 people that you saw us and heard us today. Tell them how impressed you are. I hope you were impressed. And tell them to tell 20 more people. Do you know if we do that over the next 3 months, because we just have 3 more months until the election, just a little over 3 months before November 3rd, we can win this? That little small percentage point that we're away from these Republicans that we're about to beat November the 3rd, that's the percentage point. You, the road women, I know you're on the road. I know you're going to do it. I know you're moving forward. Please tell some people about us. It costs us money to run this, to get our message out. We've got to get yard signs and radio ads. Maybe we can get TV ads if you guys give us enough. Not just to one of us, give to whoever you want to, but make sure when you tell people to vote, you tell them to vote all the way up and all the way down the ballot, and that's the beginning of change. Judge Elizabeth Davis Rozelle for Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, Place 3.
Thank you so much. It has been an absolute privilege to serve as your moderator this evening. You are obviously a very highly skilled, vastly experienced group of barrier breakers. And I hope that our audience has a new understanding of how very important our Court of Criminal Appeals really is to providing real justice to our citizens. And I hope they take this race very seriously. Thank you all so much. I know that you're all very busy, and thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kat Clemens to close us out.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, you guys. If you have any questions for these judges, please find them on social media. Make sure to like all of their pages. I think they're on all of the things, and make sure to donate. Running these campaigns is not cheap, so they could use your help. And I know that if we all chip in, we can make a difference, and we can make sure that we can get these very impressive candidates elected into office. Once again, I'd love to thank my sponsors. The sponsors of tonight was a long list of people. You're all amazing. Thank you for supporting Road Women and all of these candidates for these important judicial positions in Texas. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in for Tuesday and tonight's event. We appreciate you. If you have any concerns or issues or anything like that, reach out to us on our Facebook or Twitter or at roadwomentx@gmail.com. Hit us up if you want to collaborate and do another series of events just like this one. We'd love to connect and collaborate, because November's election is the most important election of our lifetimes. And we have to do what we can in order to make sure that we do turn Texas blue in November. And that takes all of our efforts. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you, candidates. You guys were amazing. And I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully sometime soon. Thanks, you guys. Have a great night.